Hello and welcome to Weird Together. I'm Brennan Storr, host of the Ghost Story Guys podcast.
And I'm Joseph Comeau, host of In Search of Ghosts.
And this is a show where we talk about the latest and greatest in horror movies. It used to be paranormal entertainment, now it's just horror movies, because we're weird and you're weird. So why not be weird together?
Weird Together is part of the Ghost Story Guys family of podcasts, which includes the fantastic podcasts Mysteries and Monsters, Luke Lore, and Libro de los Muertos.
I knew we weren't going to get the deep one because your voice is all fucked up because you are sick.
Yes. So I've been dealing with the cold. So which I will ask. I'm drinking tea. Bren, what are you drinking?
Well, I just finished before we went on air. A premature inhalation, I guess. I was drinking a glass of limoncello because at my heart I am an old Italian man. I went into the liquor store here in one of the liquor stores here in Montreal, trying to find tequila, and they did not have any good tequila. And somehow I ended up walking out with lemon liqueur. So it's very tasty, very nice after a meal, or just prior to a stream, apparently.
Well, let me just reassure you that it is not just in your heart that you're an old Italian man. So,
yeah.
But no, how are you, Brent?
I'm good. Of course, as you are sick, I was sick. I was sick for about 2 weeks. I had a cold similar to what you had, but real bastard. Just I couldn't get out of bed for a few days, and then I got over that. And one of my roommates brought home a stomach bug, which knocked me out for another week, which was good times. But I'm back. I'm feeling good, and I am ready to talk about what I think is a pretty great movie. But we won't spoil it. Well, I guess we will spoil it because we're going to be talking about the latest film from director Travis Stevens, A Wounded Fawn. And of course, before we talk about the film, I got to tell you a little bit about it. Well, that's inconvenient. I just had a notification come up. There we go. All right. The Wounded Fawn tells a story of note. To be one of those. Meredith, of course, does not realize Bruce is a serial killer and so accompanies him out to his luxury cabin in the woods where an escalating series of red flags from Bruce and apparently paranormal happenings outside the cabin lead Meredith to realize she has made a critical error in following a hippie to a second location. Will Meredith be murdered by a weapon that looks like it comes from Dario Argento's Ninja Turtles? Will the literal fates of Greek and Roman myth appear in physical form to wreck Bruce's shit? How many edibles did I have exactly? You'll have to watch A Wounded Fawn to find out.
That was amazing, except we couldn't hear the first 15 seconds of it.
Oh, no.
We caught part of it. I think there was an audio. This is what the universe does when we try something new, right? The universe says
square in the dick. It
says, fuck you for trying something new. That won't work. Real quick, though, let me say hey to some of the folks who are here. Ren is here joining us yet again. Thank you for being here. We've got Derek who's here. Thanks for hanging out with us, Derek. And we've got Scrapbot13. Greetings, guys. Thanks for keeping me company while I have the flu and I'm curled up praying for death. We, as we mentioned, we can relate. We both have been. I'm currently under the weather, and Bren was so. And then we've got Jenny Umanya. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Jenny. I try. Apologize if I get it wrong. Thank you for hanging out with us.
Absolutely. So, do you want me to hit that again, there, boss? Or are we good?
You know what? I think you put so much work into that. Let's try it again. Let's just make sure I give you a thumbs up that we can hear you.
Okay. How about now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. When the music started, it went all muffly.
Okay, well, we're not going to worry about the music. Fuck
okay.
A Wounded Fawn tells a story of Meredith, a museum docent who, having recently healed from an abusive relationship, ends up back in the dating pool where she finds Bruce, a serial killer who looks like Sam Worthington's untrustworthy younger brother and who kills at the behest of a giant red owl man. Yes, this is going to be one of those. Meredith, of course, does not realize Bruce is a serial killer and so accompanies him out to his luxury cabin in the woods where an escalating series of red flags from Bruce and apparently paranormal happenings outside the cabin lead Meredith to realize she has made a critical error in following a hippie to a second location. Will Meredith be murdered by a weapon that looks like it comes from Dario Argento's Ninja Turtles? Will the literal fates of Greek and Roman myth appear in physical form to wreck Bruce's shit? How many edibles did I have exactly? You'll have to watch A Wounded Fawn to find out. There we go.
There we go. Beautiful.
All right. I spent literal minutes writing that, so by God, we're going to make sure. We're going to make sure.
Rin appreciates take two. So
hey, no problem. All right. So we're obviously going to talk about the movie, but like we always say, you don't go into a movie with nothing. Every movie you've ever watched comes in with you. And so if you want to properly talk about a movie, first, you got to pick apart the baggage. All right. Joseph, my sick friend, what was your baggage going into A Wounded Fawn?
I really didn't have any baggage. I didn't have, I'm not the connoisseur of horror films that you are, so I didn't have the familiarity with the director's previous work. I just knew that it was a film that had just come out, so it would be something, you thought would be good to look at. Seemed like there was a little bit of anticipation of this film, though, based on, people who were familiar with the director's previous work. So I kind of went into it a little bit open-minded and, not really a lot of baggage going into that.
Okay. For me, it was similar, but I am a fan of the director's previous work. The director, of course, Travis Stevens. His previous two films as a director, he's been a producer for quite some time. His previous two films as director were Jacob's Wife with Larry Fessenden and Barbara Crampton. And then his debut was Girl on the Third Floor, starring Phil Brooks, who is probably better known as the wrestler CM Punk. Mm. And I liked both films. Initially, I preferred Jacob's Wife, but prior to watching A Wounded Fawn, prior to the stream, I rewatched both films, and I actually discovered I prefer Girl on the Third Floor, and I think it's because it's similar to A Wounded Fawn. I feel like there's something deeper that Stevens is kind of reaching that makes what he's dealing with, or makes what he's putting on screen, even more memorable. I mean, as we're gonna talk about, his films are very feminist. His films are very empathetic to sort of the struggles that women face, in the modern world, and kind of being, and have for a long time. It's not a modern world thing,
right?
Being ignored, minimized, their accomplishments barely acknowledged, their contributions not properly respected. And this, so I was prepared for that going in, and this very much is that. But there's again something even deeper that it touches, and I don't even necessarily quite know what it is, but I something I appreciate very much. So I went into A Wounded Fawn expecting, with high expectations, and I'll before we even get to the Toctagon, I'll say I was not disappointed. So. But that, again, we will get into the weeds of that in the only place that two grown men, adult men, care of themselves and everything, can have such a conversation. That's a Toctagon. Welcome to the Toctagon. 2 men enter, 2 men leave. Oh, I've missed that, Joseph.
It's a thing.
Well, when this becomes, and folks, this is a scoop. We're going to be in sometime in the new year, increasing our frequency again back to twice a month. But one of them will be an audio only show, and the Toctagon is the queue is still going to be there, but I feel like without the visual, it just doesn't have quite the same punch.
Yeah, 100%. So
pun intended. Give me a laugh, you son of a bitch. That was punch. I'll take it.
And Rin, thank you for the recommendation. I appreciate that. Hot ginger tea with lemon honey is soothing.
Yes.
Good advice. Thank you. All right. So here we go. Toctagon. First point I want to get to is just in general, I think that the opening of the film did a really good job of setting the tone for the film. There's just this really kind of stylized approach taken by the director between these, really up close, extreme close-ups to random things like the knot of the tie, right, and people's jewelry, and then, of course, Bruce. It really did a good job of setting the tone. And obviously, This is shot in 16 millimeter film, which, I don't have a lot of familiarity. I'm not a connoisseur of indie films in the same way that you are. But something about the style of it and all of that really worked. And it set the tone in that first scene. And, and I would contrast that with, the opening scene of the film we talked about last time, Dark Glasses, set an interesting tone that the rest of the film just didn't follow, right? There was no cohesive vision. That film had an interesting opening, and that was the only thing interesting about the film.
It had a good score. I was actually listening. Funny you mentioned. I was listening to the score from Dark Glasses yesterday when I was working. That's not bad. It's okay. Better in the movie.
Yeah, right. But this film, it set a tone with the use of color and visuals and everything that was really part of this really cohesive vision for the film that we'll talk about a little bit more later. But I just really liked from the beginning what I was seeing in terms of how it was filmed and the art direction and everything.
Yeah, there's a tangibility, I think, that the 16 mil introduced to the experience. And also, as I understand it, now I didn't find a lot of information about this, but I believe they also used vintage lenses, which sort of contributed to that feeling, because the film's not set in the 70s. It's a modern film, but it's very much inspired by 70s, I would say, jolly and grindhouse cinema. It's very much got that aesthetic, and the 16 millimeter goes a long way. And I will say, there's a big difference between real 16 and simulated 16, because frankly, one of the first films we did on this stream was The Scary of 61st. And I honestly think if that hadn't been shot on 16, I think it, you and I weren't huge fans of it, although I've seen it way more times than I'd like to admit, and own a copy, but that's a whole other beast. But I feel like it would have had a lot less impact had it been shot digitally, because I feel like there is something about 16 and about, film generally, but I think specifically 16, where you get this sense that you're maybe watching something a little bit seedy, a little bit seamy. The like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first one, was shot on 16. And excuse me, there's a great story that the cinematographer Daniel Pearl tells about, excuse me, my voice is crazy at the moment. But there's a great story that Daniel Pearl tells about shooting the scene in the very... Have you seen Texas Chainsaw?
I actually have not. Yeah.
Okay, so that would be worth watching sometime. But anyways, there's a night scene, and it's very dark. And Pearl says that, the nature of the film at the time and the cameras, he said the incredible amount of light required to produce that very dark image, because the film stock was just not very sensitive, was huge. And of course, I have no idea how camera technology and film technology specifically has improved. I'm not even going to pretend like I know, but they all have that sense of something that you're not supposed to see. And contrast that with, say, Apollo 18, which I quite liked. It was a horror film from about 10 years ago now. But that was, I believe, shot digitally and then sort of in simulated 16. And again, better film than a lot of people give it credit for, but it doesn't have that same, it just lacks that tangible quality. I don't think you can simulate it. Like the cinematographer Steve Yedlin, who shoots a lot of Rian Johnson stuff like Knives Out, he's actually a very technically proficient cinematographer, and he's developed some kind of algorithm for simulating grain on digital film, and it's good. Like, it looks good, but it's still not. It's just not the same as watching something shot on film. But it is, again, it's very good.
Derek mentioned here the scratches, and I saw the occasional scratches. And what do you have any insights into that? Is that just what an artifact of dealing with that film? Was it intentional?
I think it was. It may have been intentional, but I don't believe it was simulated. I think it was part and parcel of shooting on 16. And also, I think it's important to remember it's a cheap fucking movie, and I don't mean that as an insult. I just mean it's a very low, it's a low budget independent film. And I actually thought that worked to the film's favor. Yeah, I remember seeing a review once of this horror game. I think it was called Knossos, The Depths of Fear, and the reviewer said it's not a great game, but it's an independent game, and it feels like the world is barely held together. And the way they described it is it feels like this horror game was designed by someone who himself doesn't quite fully understand what it is he's made. And it's just got this like kind of dangerous quality that's, it's again barely held together. And this kind of has that. But again, I don't mean that as an insult. It just has this sort of very real quality, very kind of like threatening quality to it.
Yeah, and I think, and this is I think a good point to jump off into a related point, that the 16 millimeter worked really well. I thought it gave it that sort of feel of something underground, something just not quite mainstream, but it also worked really well with what I thought was maybe the best thing about this film, and that was the use of light and color. And even little details like if you see the little overnight bag, this red 70s-ish kind of vintage overnight bag with the cool colors, the vintage Mercedes he was driving. But then when you first see this bird demon, like I took notice of not just that red light, but the very, I think, intentional choice to have it juxtaposed against sort of a greenish wall, right? And that just worked really well. It contrasted really nicely. And even this, it doesn't show up as well in this image, but there's a point later in the film where there's that almost looks like a green sheet kind of flapping. But
I think
something
it's
about
a tarp.
A tarp, okay. Something about that though in the film actually looked really cool, and there's just a lot of other little things we'll talk about a little bit later, like the therapist's office, but like the design elements, the cabin, the colors, the art. There was a vision there from minute one to the very last minute that included very intentional use of color and lighting that worked well in the 16 millimeter format.
Yeah, I there's a clip I have here because, of course, the film opens with an auction where these very wealthy, I guess technically emissaries from wealthy people are bidding on high art for them. And there's a sculpture called the Wrath of the Irenaeus, which is being up for bid, and which is up for bid. And Bruce is one of the bidders. He's allegedly bidding on it for a client. And the sculpture depicts a man being set upon by the Irenaeus, the Fates, the three sisters. I think their names are Alecto, Megara, and Tisiphone. And the idea is that they are we're also referred to as the Furies or the Eumenides, but they are agents of vengeance in Greek and Roman myth, particularly against men who have committed grievous crimes. And so he is bidding, these people are bidding on this thing. And Bruce is in a bidding war with another character, Kate, played by, I believe, Malin Barr, who eventually her client wins. It's a $135,000 bid. And so later the film then follows her to her house where Bruce eventually kills her. But this scene here, this is in Kate's apartment. And again, just a really masterful use of shadow, which, I mean, one, I think establishes just tone, but two, really kind of, to me, sort of implies also that the world around this person, like it's a very high end, it's a high end place, but there's also, she's like, the danger is always just literally around the corner. Darkness is always just around the corner. And I mean, and as a coward and someone who's very aware of his physical frailties, I understand this, and also I'd like to point out that Kate, again, depicted here, opening some champagne to celebrate. She is shown carrying a crate with this statue, the sculpture, the Wrath of the Irenaeus, which, now remember, her client just paid $135,000 for this. She is carrying it here like a pizza. That's 135 grand. I get nervous pulling my goddamn Android phone out of my pocket.
Nice. Yeah.
I refuse to drive my wife's car because I'm worried. And my wife's car costs about half of what that thing did. So I admire this woman navigating this high stakes world, because I would have pooped my very expensive trousers.
Yeah. Well, and I think that segues into kind of a point, my next point, and for as courageous and brave as Kate is, and there's a point though you kind of wonder about her sensibilities. Is she a little too self-confident, or I don't know, just because like weird psychopath dude shows up at her door and is like, hey, I want to pay you twice as much for this, and it's like, well, why would your buyers be willing to pay double for it? And his response is, because they see something beautiful and they want it, and gives a creepy smile. I mean, and then she lets him in and turns her back to him, and I just felt like Kate seemed too smart to do that. I mean, her character from the things you see, but maybe she was just a little too, I don't know, just didn't have enough stranger danger. I don't know.
Well, I actually think that's kind of realistic, because I think if you look at, I've met men and women like this, but I because we're talking about Kate, so I've known women like this who I think they are perhaps overly confident in their ability to assess the danger men represent.
Okay.
Because they're aware, okay, men are dangerous, but I think they think that it's easier to control, because some people are easy to control, right? Some men, even though they appear to be very dangerous, you can control them relatively simply. I'm told. I'm not good at this, but I've been told this by women. But I think that leads you to, and certainly I've seen this with sometimes with people I've known, where they have a little too much confidence in themselves, and they don't properly assess it. For example, I once knew a woman who was going to a conference in New Orleans, and she's a friend. And so I said, hey, have a great time. Just so you know, it's dangerous as shit down there. Just be careful, because I'd been in New Orleans a couple times, and, especially, I was down there in 2008, which is, I think 4 years after Katrina. It was, it's hairy. And she just wouldn't hear it. She said, oh, I've lived in Vancouver. I know what it's like to be in a city, back off. Okay, well, have fun down there, you fucking moron. And, it's a rough city. And so I think because he comes across as weak, his whole, I thought that was the depiction of the intro, like you and I were talking about this before the show, the depiction of the relationships between men and women was really, really well portrayed in this. It was really great. And he comes across as very weak, because he's a weak man. But weak people can be very dangerous, and sometimes people don't understand that. Yeah, because all you see is a weak person. You think, oh, it looks like he's wearing his dad's suit. He offers to wait outside because well, what possible danger can he represent? And quite often those are the guys you actually have to worry about, because they're carrying, as I said, Dario Argento's Ninja Turtles murder weapons. So,
real quick, I want to say thank you, August Sinhun Tate. I'm sure I mispronounced that. I apologize. I'm a fan of you both. So amazing to see you guys talk, even though I haven't seen the film. Thank you for hanging out with us.
Thanks for hanging out.
Definitely appreciate the kind words. So there's definitely, and this character, I think there's some interesting things about how they wrote him. And as you pointed out, the relationships between men and women, and how this attempt to kind of have power or control by men, but that's really rooted out of kind of weakness and insecurity. And I thought there were a lot of red flags throughout the film about him.
There was a whole color guard competition.
Right, exactly. So they're driving to the cabin, right? And and they're talking, and there's just so many little things when she asks him, what's the weirdest job he's ever had, and he just doesn't have a response. Like, I've never had a weird job. What about you? It's just someone who has no experiences to talk about is weird. But then she's talking about her ex, and then he puts his hand on her leg, and it was just like, and you could tell was very uncomfortable for her. She's like, it was the wrong gesture with the wrong cue, not reading the situation. Right?
Like, imagine how tone deaf.
Yeah.
I have just told you that I've suffered abuse at the hands of a domestic partner. Oh, now you're going to put your hands on me without my permission. Cool. Right. Cool. You are good at this. You are, boy, right. I bet you're going to be awesome in bed.
Right. And then they're driving, and Meredith, like listen. I have not been. It's been 19 years since I've been single, so I get that. I don't get this stuff, but even I know that these cues, like she's like, "Hey, look at that. Do you want to stop and get some snacks? I could actually use the restroom." So like that's a. I gotta go. I gotta stop, but let's do something fun. And his response was, "Meredith, we're so close. Do you think you can hold it? I'd love to get to the cabin and get settled in." It's like,
you silly woman.
yeah, it's like, like I know that, like, talking to your date like they are kids on a road trip. Listen, kid, I have kids. Listen, kids, can you hold it? Bad idea, And
Just
then
300 more miles. We'll
Yeah.
get to a bathroom. Just piss out the window. We'll figure something out. Yeah.
But then, she kind of like, okay. And then his response is you're the best. Like, I mean, like,
right?
That's just so psychopath across the board. And then my favorite was this interaction. Bruce says, "I love this part." And Meredith says, "What part?" Bruce says, "The intimacy. It's my favorite part." And I'm like, this guy's acting like a lizard person in a human skin suit who's read some book on human relationships and is trying to kind of like, I guess I'm supposed to say intimacy. That's my favorite part.
I like the human touch connection.
So
I do not wish to wear you as a suit. I will not masturbate into a sink later.
Yeah, so Rin with a comment here. A certain kind of man sees a woman's truth as a sign of weakness and goes in for the kill. Okay, when a woman is like being honest, and that's unfortunate. Like in all reality, like when someone is transparent or vulnerable, they are giving you an opening to be a more intimate part of their life. But some men abuse that, right? And they see that as a chance for manipulation, which is unfortunate. So,
I should say too, as as someone who was a very long time ago the victim of emotional abuse from a domestic partner, that goes the other way too. I just because inevitably someone's going to say, "Well, it happens to men too," and yes, it does. And I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. So there were just so many, as you said, like a full color guard, just. And obviously this was an intentional decision. They wanted to write him as this kind of character where there was just red flag after red flag after red flag. And literally this is half of them. There's so many. When they get to the cabin, it gets worse. Constant, and he's like, and like, this is supposed to be like one of maybe their second date.
I will say that I don't care if it's second, third, fourth date. That's
right.
not enough dates to go alone to someone's cabin.
Right.
And I'm 300 pounds.
There you go.
I cannot tell you what sounds worse than going with a stranger to a cabin where I have no power to leave on my own. That's like Napoleon on Elba. I cannot possibly imagine why anyone would enjoy this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we know how you feel about the woods.
Yeah. Well, there's that too. But I don't know. Yeah, anywhere I cannot get away from, at least she has her own room. Because I would say if someone said, "Come to my cabin in the woods," and we're going to share a bed, I would just hang myself in the shower stall, a la Final Destination. Because no. I don't like share. I like sharing a bed with my wife because I love my wife. But if we could have a giant king size bed and we have our own little fiefdoms that we can sometimes cross, like a what do you call it? The not a raiding party, but like a diplomatic corps. All right, we're gonna meet in the DMZ in the middle and cuddle. Then we're gonna fuck off to our own sides of the bed. Having to share a bed with a total stranger in a cabin in the woods. That when I finally go to hell, that's what it'll be.
That makes sense. Yeah. So yeah, it was interesting though. I mean, obviously they wanted you to see. It's interesting, like because like that first act with Kate, you almost didn't need that to know. I mean, because you clearly can see something's up with this guy, right, all the way through. I'm not saying it shouldn't have been in the film, but if there were a way to have had that scene happen and not know who the murderer was, you would know who the murderer was. Because
I mean, I think it's important to show the provenance of the statue because I think the statue is really significant because, as I mentioned, the Furies, they represent female rage.
Yeah.
And that's not something men, even I think some women, are comfortable with. Like women always have to kind of appear, they have to express their frustrations in certain ways in order to be taken seriously. I mean, there's a moment later in the film where Bruce is having what may be a hallucination or maybe a visitation, but he's telling this person who was one of his victims, well, your anger is not going to change anything. But then he himself constantly gives into his anger.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's significant to show the degrees to which he'd go to possess this thing. Because I think in a way, it shows him trying to possess the thing he fears. If I possess female rage. I have that thing. I have taken that thing by force, and now it is in my control. And I think it's a little bit. There's this great moment in the film Leaves of Grass, which was directed by Tim Blake Nelson, where a character at the very end of the film says, "When I was younger, I was terrified of thunderstorms, and so I read everything I could about them. I tried to understand them. I knew everything about thunderstorms, and they still scared me anyways." And they still happened anyways. And I think this is kind of him trying to forestall, trying to save himself, trying to forestall this vengeance that will come, because he knows that you cannot continue to do this shit forever without some kind of comeuppance. I mean, it doesn't always come in the form of, whatever the hell happens in the third act. Right. But although I wish it did, man, I wish that, Jeffrey Dahmer someone clonked him on the head with a statue, and then he woke up and a woman made of wicker was cutting his favorite owl man in half. I wish that for Jeffrey Dahmer, for him to have been chased through the woods by a trash bag ghost until he lay shivering, nude, and terrified on the ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yes, you are. That's all right. On that note, I'm going to talk about something I think is appropriate, which is therapy. I think the therapist's office was interesting to me, completely going in a different direction here. My wife is a therapist, and I just got to ask, how much is this therapist charging per hour to afford an office with this view? I mean, that was just, she has a fucking baby grand piano. What's she charging? Like $500 a session hour?
She might be in Ohio.
Maybe. But it's interesting because Meredith's big epiphany for this was definitely foreshadowing. Her big epiphany, or her lesson that she learned when she's asked by her therapist is, I've learned not to absolve a man for his transgressions against me. Right. And I thought that was, obviously everything in this film is very intentional, but I thought that was an interesting, kind of prelude to what would happen, that because you see her, you see these moments where she is kind of letting some things slide, with his behavior, but she doesn't have a ton of, maybe she doesn't have she's trying to she has limited choice in that, I guess you could say. But then there's a point where she fights back. Right. And, and he is not absolved, but I thought that was interesting. Scrapbot saying, she's got the full Hannibal.
Yeah, Hannibal, that's a great point. Hannibal's got a whole, like a whole lecture hall in his that he, with like 2 stories and one of those ladders you climb up and push yourself, it's kind of silly.
Yeah,
but he's gorgeous, so I'll let it go. Mads, call me. Something I thought was on the subject of not letting him get away with his shit, that character, Bruce,
yes,
played, who I don't think we've mentioned yet, by Josh Rubin, who's actually a very accomplished director himself. He directed Scare Me, which to be honest, I have not seen, but I've heard very good things about, and Werewolves Within, which really kind of was low key, I think, the most successful video game adaptation in history. No one really speaks of it that way, but it is a video game adaptation, and it's a great horror film. It's funny. It's got a ton of personality. Really, really worth seeing. But yeah, Bruce and Ruben is great as Bruce. But Bruce, you know, he never ever takes accountability for his actions. But even once the third act kicks into high gear, and he just starts getting boot fucked by the fates, he tries to blame this owl man he sees. He tries to blame that. You know, it's a part of me. It's in my brain, but it's not a part of me. Yeah. That's sort of how he refuses to own his culpability for these things. And I love that, you know, I know we're going to talk about the end of the film, but in the end of the film, you know, he thrashes around as we'll discuss, kind of hurting himself, and Meredith just watches impassively. And I think that's a really great metaphor, because I know, you know, again, men and women do this too, but we're talking about men who will, instead of taking responsibility for their shitty behavior, they will kind of make a big production out of it. Well, I guess I must be a terrible person. And they'll kind of self-flagellate to the point where the person they've wronged then comforts them, instead of what should be, you know, this person who fucked up saying, oh man, I fucked up. And it kind of, you know, instead they get comfort. And it's a very shitty, you know, emotionally abusive tactic. But I love that she has had this revelation, and at the end of the film, she doesn't give in. Yeah. She just lets him thrash and destroy himself for a very long time, again, as we'll discuss.
Yeah, and, you know, I think there's some interesting dialogue in that third act, you know, when he's saying, you know, if you're looking to wring some kind of something out of me, you'll get nothing. And he very, very, you know, kind of, I don't know, he states it in a very intentional way, you know, that you will get nothing from me, you know. And then, you know, then the point when he finally is sitting there at the table, he's asking, will it purify me? And I love her response, no, Bruce, you're fucked. You know, there's just some really great, you know, kind of dialogue to the point. But yeah, and then, you know, there is that ending that you kind of alluded to, which is that, you know, it was very intentional. I read bits of an interview, but like there's this end where he's there just flopping around like a dying fish, and it was for the entirety of the credits, minutes on end, and it was very uncomfortable to watch. It's like it felt like as if you were watching something die. Literally, like you know, I make the joke about a fish, but literally, like if you had a fish you caught and you put it on the pier or whatever and just watched it flop around until it was dead, it felt cruel to be. And even though he was clearly a person who himself was, you know, guilty of, you know, repeated cruelty, it put, as a viewer, it felt cruel to watch, or it felt very uncomfortable to sit and watch him flop.
I mean, it was uncomfortable, but I actually found it satisfying.
Okay.
You know, because he was such a pathetic figure. Because again, the whole that entire you know, not necessarily a tirade, but that whole fit is just him just completely refusing, again, to take any responsibility. He's just thrashing at himself, hoping that someone will save him. And it's 11 minutes. That shot. I saw in an interview with Travis Stevens. Yeah. That's a whole 16 millimeter reel, 11 minutes.
And they just let it roll.
They just let it roll. Yeah. He said by that point, he tries to shoot as chronologically as possible. And so by that point in the shoot, everyone was very comfortable with each other. And so he just kind of said, you know, do your thing. And they ran with it. And again, I liked that. It's similar. There was a similar shot at the end of Ty West's Pearl. Which is just this very, very lengthy, uncomfortable, held shot. In that, the main character Pearl is just wearing this death rictus grin as she is falling apart. It's an incredible performance. I really liked Pearl, but it's similar in that it holds it to the point where you're now uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and I like that, because I think it then forces us to examine, why am I uncomfortable?
Right.
What is it about this that upsets me?
And when I say that it was uncomfortable, it was I give it credit for that. It was like I'm not saying I wish it wasn't there. It's more like they accomplished something by making me feel uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It was part of the art form.
Yeah,
Right.
and
To do that.
And props to Josh Rubin for doing that, because that's an impressive amount of vulnerability on camera and trust in your director. So that was very cool.
Yeah. And and this is as a larger, and this is kind of my last point, as an overarching kind of observation about the film. One of the things I just in general like is that you took a film that looked like kind of the slasher genre of this man who's gonna murder the hell out of a bunch of women, and does the lone surviving woman fight back and survive or not, and it really kind of subverted that genre by turning it into something very different. This surreal kind of venture into this weird world of his torment. It made it something completely different, and I appreciated that it wasn't just a cliche textbook slash. In fact, once we get more towards pretty much to the third act, that sense of fear for Meredith is gone, because she's kind of she has been transformed into one of the fates. So it's like through the entire second act, you're kind of fearful for her. But once we hit that third act, it not only does it subvert that genre by going a different direction, but it does it in a way where all of a sudden you're not even fearful for her anymore. You kind of figure we're in a new space. So somehow it just really transforms the film completely in that regard.
Yeah, and contrast that with the last movie we did, Dark Glasses.
Yeah.
Because Dark Glasses was made by Dario Argento, who was one of the kings of the giallo, which again this film is inspired by. That kind of slasher thing you're talking about. That's where that originates.
Yeah.
And this is so much better than that.
Yeah.
It's so much better in every conceivable way. And it's just fascinating that we've kind of reached that point now where the next generation of filmmakers has been able to take those stylistic tropes and then transcend them. And I think that's really cool, because I'll be honest, I get really bored with a lot of modern horror, especially independent horror, because the directors are such fans of genre and such fans of classic horror cinema. I find that they're often kind of just doing that thing again. They'll they'll say like, oh, let's have that shot like in The Thing. Let's have we're gonna have like a tribute to Halloween in this shot. And it just becomes kind of rote. And it's pastiche, I guess, past a certain point, where this takes those things and does them very, very well, better than obviously, than the original in a lot of ways, and then takes it somewhere completely unexpected. And I love the shit out of that. I really hope this Travis Stevens, if you're watching, if you're listening, please release this on physical. I would love to own a Blu-ray of this thing.
Yeah, and and that's a great point. And like I think there's a difference between a nod to a previous director's work and recreating, I think, and that's I feel like is what you're talking about. There people who are influenced by previous works and do it in a different way. They take the essence, the ethos of it, and they create something new. That's people who've done it right. It's when you're recreating a shot or a style that's not quite right. And and you mentioned, this film did so many things that Dark Glasses tried to do but couldn't do effectively. The suspense that it created, the fear, the everything about it. The Scary of 61st we mentioned earlier. I think this film did the 16 millimeter in a way, film in a way that film just didn't do as effectively. And of course, they did, the bird demon better than demonic, right? So across the board. Here. Oh, I think it's pretty empirically true. So this film just succeeded where so many other films we've looked at have failed miserably, especially demonic.
Hang on, where is it here? This actually sums up my. Yeah, there we
go. See,
go.
my goal is to get at least one of those stings per episode.
Well, you're on a roll, so.
Right?
No, something to talk about the bird demon. Well, one, yes, I agree with your point. Did that shit better than all those other movies. Although, much like Scary of 61st, it does feature someone jerking off. So, I got it. It's a part of the weird together cinematic universe. But no, there's a scene with the Fates and the bird demon that I'm borrowing your slide, that I really appreciated, and that is where they have Bruce is sitting at the table, and the Fates are basically taking apart, because this creature has loomed, as you said, this creature has loomed in the background. Whenever he's about to do violence, he sees this first, and he sort of blames the creature. It's obviously he holds a kind of awe and reverence for it, and then there's a scene where the Fates essentially operate on it, and he is terrified. Bruce is terrified about this. And I thought that was, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I thought it was a really effective illustration of how, as men, sometimes we have these totemic figures which don't really mean anything, but we talk about them like they're a big deal. Like this matters. This thing is important. But then when you really kind of strip all that down and you look underneath it, it's actually kind of pathetic.
I think the direct reference that seems to make sense is like ego or pride, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because once you strip away all the pomp and bullshit, it's something kind of pathetic underneath.
Yeah, machismo, right? That sort of kind of, interesting.
Yeah.
That then which sadly does kind of lead to a lot of men, some of the bad behavior, right?
Yeah, and later on, I want to find my note here. Right. So, as I say, the whole time the film, Bruce is kind of in a position of power because he can let himself appear, pathetic. I mean, ultimately he is pathetic, but when he appears to Kate, he seems very kind of retiring and I'll wait outside because to him he's got this weapon, and in the end he's going to kill you. But as the film progresses, once the third act turn happens and things starts getting weird, and Meredith disappears outside, he's completely out of his element. When he's chasing her in the house, he's powerful, he's strong. But the second he's outside, his dominance is just it is no longer, it just doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's a great example of how things like patriarchal power depends on a very specific set of circumstances. I can't tell you that. Funny enough, I'm listening to the audiobook version of the Devil's Chessboard, which is about the life of former CIA director Allen Dulles. And they talk about, I think they were talking about Dulles, but he kind of felt that the female form was just like inherently inferior. And it's hilarious because the only reason you can say that is because you are already ahead. All the circumstances are in place for you to achieve. But if those weren't there, well, all of a sudden the old guy with the droopy outside genitals that are real vulnerable to a swift kick, suddenly you're pathetic, Right. And again, I thought that, Josh is, and so many dudes I know who tell me, I'm a dom. They're one, no, you're not. And two, their superiority is based on, again, a very specific set of circumstances. And if you step outside that framework and you force them to operate outside it, they got nothing. And I just thought the film very effectively sort of showed the fragility of Bruce, despite his brutality. Ultimately, he's very, very fragile, and I thought that was another way to display that.
Yeah, I mean, power's contextual, right? Someone with all the money in the world is real powerful until they're in the middle of, shitstorm Katrina and fighting for their life, and then their money doesn't mean anything, right? But someone who's very strong and physically strong in a social setting where that doesn't do jack for you, right? You're dealing with bureaucracies or dealing with social norms or dealing with personalities or navigating negotiations. Your physical strength doesn't do shit for you there. It's there's a lot of different contexts, but certain contexts have been constructed that favor, those who are in power, men and other groups as well.
Yeah. So is that it for you? That is the end of your talk to gun points?
Yes.
So I'm more or less there as well. And of course, we want to bring this in under an hour. But I will say there's just one thing I wanted to mention specifically. One is Sarah Lind plays
Mhm.
Meredith, and she's exceptional.
Mhm.
She's also in Jacob's Wife and Girl on the Third Floor. Brilliant actress. And the outfit she wears, I specifically wanted to mention, just because, again, this is a great illustration of the differences between the sexes. She looks stunning
Right.
at the cabin. And Bruce looks like my cousin, the welder, after his shift. And I am never more aware of this discrepancy than when I'm out for dinner with my wife and she looks radiant and I look like an old couch someone left out in the rain.
Yes, I can relate.
So that has been the Talk to Gun. And now, of course, I got to know, Joseph, what do you think?
What you think?
What I think is that's going to be equally as bad in audio only. That's what I think.
You are not wrong. You are not wrong. I'm uncomfortable every time I look at it, but I can't help myself.
Yeah, you know. What do I think? I really like this film. It wasn't perfect, but it was very good. I thought, and particularly the visuals, like we talked about before, the lighting, the use of color, the use of the 60mm film. I thought the acting was generally good. There may be a few points here and there that it wasn't perfect, but I thought there was some really good dialogue, some really good decisions. I don't know if we mentioned this. We were talking about this beforehand. There's like little things, like when her friend tells her it's time to leave, get out of there, right? And she's in the bathroom, and the way she composes herself, like Meredith, she's like,
oh yes,
like that just felt realistic, like a woman who's like in a situation that's dangerous and knows that her survival depends on navigating the situation, right?
Yeah,
like just little things like that that I thought were really good about the writing. So yeah, this is one of the better films we've reviewed, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. I think this and Saloom are maybe two of the best films we've done. I very much hope there's a physical release because I don't have a Blu-ray player here with me in Montreal, but even so, I would have it shipped happily have it shipped home and watch that shit later because it's a beautiful film. And sometimes streaming with the compression artifacts and shit, you just don't get the full experience. But no, I would wholeheartedly recommend this. I think I gave it first time I watched it, I rated it 4 stars out of 5 on Letterboxd, and then when I watched it again today, it was 4.5 because I liked it even more the second time around. And I guess that's it, Joseph.
Yeah.
All right. So we will be back. Well, the next live show will be, I don't know, we didn't really talk about this. I think this is probably the last show for the year.
Could be, to be determined. We're gonna do something different. We might start that up after New Year. We'll keep everyone posted on social media, but yeah, we're kind of figuring out the new schedule.
Yes, but until then, of course, you can find me on the Ghost Story Guys podcast, ghoststoryguys.com, and everywhere fine podcasts live.
And you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on YouTube at In Search of Ghosts, and obviously here with Weird Together.
Excellent. And folks, we want to thank you for joining us. This is so much fun. We love when you comment. We love hearing from you. I love doing this show, and I know Joseph does too. And so until next time, remember, we're weird.
And you're weird.
So why not be weird together? See you next time.
Let me ride.